Hi everyone. In this video, we're gonna learn what group policy is and how to configure one. Stay tuned. In today's video, we're gonna talk about group policy in Active Directory. Think of group policy as the law enforcement of a domain. It defines what users can and cannot do, what apps they can access, what features are allowed, and what is restricted. Now, in Active Directory, we don't just have one group policy. Policies can exist at different levels: local, site, domain, OU or organizational unit, and nested OU. So the big question is, which one is more powerful? The answer is simple: the one that applies last. Let's break it down with an example. First, we have the local group policy. This policy only applies to one specific computer and the users who log into it. Let's say the local policy allows you to open settings, control panels, use the camera, but not changing this desktop wallpaper. Now imagine the company has two locations, one in Washington and one in Oregon. Each location is considered a site, and each site can have its own policy. Since site policy is applied after local policy, it overrides conflicting settings. Let's say the site policy says you cannot open settings or control panel settings. You can still use the camera and you still cannot change the wallpaper. In the previous policy, in local policy, you could open setting and control panel, but in the site policy, you cannot. In the previous policy, you could use the camera and you can still use the camera in site policy, and also the same rule for the desktop wallpaper. It only changes the settings that conflict with the previous policy, which in this case, the setting and control panel access. Next comes the domain policy. Since it's applied after the site policy, it overwrites it. Now imagine the domain policy says you can open setting and control panel setting, you can change your wallpaper, but you cannot use the camera. In the site policy, you could not open setting and control panel, now you can. In the previous policy, you could not change the wallpaper, now you can. In the previous policy, you could use the camera, now you cannot. Because it applied later in the hierarchy, it wins. Now let's talk about organizational unit. Inside the company, we might have IT department, finance department, and accounting department. Each department can have its own OU and its own group policy. If an OU policy exists, it overrides the domain policy because again, it's applied later. And just like before, it only overrides the settings that conflict. Then we have nested OU, which is basically an OU inside another OU. Since again, it applies last in the order, it has the highest priority. So remember this order: local, site, domain, OU, and nested OU. And remember, the last one that applies is the winner. In this video, we're going to focus on the OU group policy and see how it applies to a user. We'll also look at an example of one policy overriding another policy. To create an OU, go to Active Directory Users and Computers, create a new OU. I'll name it guest. Now, move the user we created in the previous video into this OU. Next, open Group Policy Management. If you don't see the OU, refresh it. There we go. Right-click the OU, create a GPO, give it a name. Now right-click the GPO and select Edit. Here's something important. If you configure the policy under Computer Configuration, it applies to the computer only. It does not follow the user. But if you configure it under User Configuration, it follows the user wherever they log in. For this example, we'll configure it under User Configuration. Go to Policies, Administrative Templates, and Control Panel. I'm going to enable the setting that prevents access to Settings and Control Panel. Apply it. Now switch to the Windows 10 machine. Open Command Prompt and type gpupdate /force. Hit Enter. Now try opening Settings. As you can see, access is blocked. No matter how you want to access setting, it is blocked. Now let me show you how a higher level policy overrides a lower level one. First, I will add the user to domain admins because only administrators can edit policies. Next, on the Windows 10 machine, I will install RSAT tools. Oh, I can't access the setting because of the group policy. So I need to go back and move the user from the guest to OU back to the user's container so I can access the setting and install the RSAT tools. Before downloading and installing RSAT tools, you want to add a public DNS server in your network configuration. Why is it asking for administrative credentials? I just added the user and the domain admin. It shouldn't ask me for it. No problem. I will fix it later. For now, just put in the admin credentials and move on with the process. Without a public DNS server, you will not be able to download and install the RSAT tools. Now go to Settings, Apps and Features, Optional Features, Add a Feature, and search for RSAT. Yeah, the reason why I'm not seeing any options is because I'm not an admin. So I need to go and add the user into the enterprise admin. Now it solved the problem. Install Active Directory tools. You might need to restart your computer for the changes to take effect. Now open Local Group Policy Editor. Go to Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Start menu, and Taskbar. Enable the setting, remove and prevent access to shutdown, restart, and more. As you can see, the shutdown options disappear. Now let's override it from the server using an OU policy. Since the local rule was configured under computer configuration, we must configure it under computer configuration in the server group policy management as well. Also, make sure the computer is inside the guest OU. Otherwise, the policy won't apply. Now disable that rule in the OU policy. Go back to Windows 10 and run gpupdate /force. Check the shutdown option again. And there we go. They're back. This shows how a higher level group policy overrides a lower level one. So today we'll learn what group policy is, the hierarchy, local, site, domain, OU, and nested OU, how to create a link a GPO or group policy object, the difference between user and computer configuration, how policy overrides each other, and how the test changes in a lab environment. If you run into any issues while setting this up, drop your question in the comment. See you in the next one.